Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Sim Sundays podcast. Another week of exciting news. How are you guys doing?
Great. How about you?
Good. George, dramatic week?
I'm very good. I feel a lot better since our last show, which is good. Recovered from my horrendous cold or whatever it was. I don't know. It was just a blur, but yeah, it's good.
I was impressed that you surved that episode. Like, you arrived into the...
you might have seen me keel over and die.
Recording studio feeling. But you powered through, man. It's a sign of a true professional.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Random Call Sign, what do you bring to the table this week?
Good news. IndyCar is back at iRacing. I think it's one of the best news. Well, the year's just started, but it started with a pretty good piece of news, which is finally iRacing being with IndyCar again. And also this translates into another bigger point, which is exclusivity rights on racing games. So on a good part is that now it is more open to everybody. We have a product that we can test. We have a series that we can use that had plenty of good racing, plenty of good splits, and also plenty of good championship and special events. So that is open to a bunch of people. And the other point I want to make is about exclusivity rights in sim racing titles that they actually need to serve a vast majority of people. I understand why some of the series want to have just to be in a place. I think exclusivity rights can work in that as long as it is open and they have a product that is usable. But unlike Porsche, that had exclusivity rights with EE for a long number of years, that means that nobody else could use the moniker Porsche unless in very specific circumstances.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously IndyCar has had a bit of a rough time in the gaming world. It hasn't been smooth sailing, which has always been a shame because I've always seen IndyCar as a real opportunity to merge oval racing and road racing. I have to admit, I've done very little oval racing. I tried a little bit. We had Jeff McConey of McConey Setup Shop. If you're into your oval racing and dirt racing, you've probably heard of him. He came on the show maybe a year ago, and we actually did some racing during the show, and we did some oval racing, and I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it. It was dirt oval, but I have to admit I have never done anything since. So the idea of an iRacing series which is going to combine oval and road, I think it's good for kind of merging those two communities, and I think everyone can agree that it being on iRacing, you can infer that IndyCar is now in safe hands.
Yeah, that's a big point, I think, because iRacing always had a good rapport with consumers by using pretty much every single license that they take. Generally, it is in very good hands. Like it or not, iRacing, I think they do an excellent job of maintaining the player base more or less happy, even if there are some issues with it. That sometimes happen in special events because 10,000, 15,000 people try to go to special event races, but generally it is very well taken care of, and it shows respect to the community, and it shows respect also to the license they're using. So I thought when it moved to MSG that it felt very disingenuous, not only from MSG. Well, MSG was doing its job, but from IndyCar, why move when everybody is already had a good time with it? And going forward, there was nothing telling them that it would be bad. It felt very self-centered, I guess. So they have to come back a year or two later. They have to come back.
Hi, guys.
Yeah, we're back here again. Yeah, you should never have left.
Don't know if you've been watching. Yeah, no, it is good news. It's good news. It's nice to start the year with some good news. So talking of quality, and I'm going to say good news, but this is how I'm choosing to kind of interpret this news. Forza Motorsport developers have put out a statement which you don't have to read between the lines that much to infer it's essentially them being like, okay, this launch has not been as successful as we would have liked because of our failings. Sounds harsh, but I guess it's probably true. There's a lot of devout, and I'll use that word, devout Forza fans who were a bit upset by the quality. Forza has such a strong fan base, right? It's one of the sim racing titles, or simcade, whatever you want to call it, that straddles wheel and controller, which means it has a huge audience, and it's super accessible. And it has, the car upgrade system that goes through it. So you get some real kind of petrol heads who absolutely love that game. So I went and saw the preview of the game at Gamescom last year, and it looked stunning. I came away thinking, okay, this looks like a beautiful game. If this plays well, it's going to be a winner. But it just didn't play well. So they released a statement talking about upgrades that they needed to do to the AI system, the car progression system, and the penalty system. So they're listening to the community. So although you could say, is this a good news story? It's Forza saying that the game isn't that good. Okay, not that good. It's not that it's not that good. It's obviously a good game, but it's got flaws, right? I'm taking the positive that they've gone to the effort of putting out an official statement rather than internally being like, okay, community's saying they don't like this, don't like that, let's fix it and put it in the patch notes, and then just not telling the community, okay, put our hands up, we didn't get this quite right, but we're going to put a concerted effort into fixing these things that you've told us you want. They've gone to the effort of putting a statement out. So I think it's a good news story, and I'd like to see more studios following suit when the community is crying out about the issues with their beloved racing games, F1.
I hope this is a more of a No Man's Sky kind of approach.
Yes.
Because Forza, they probably at turn 10, they're looking at it, and they have more information than us with the player base that is still playing, and we don't have any view of what is happening in Microsoft Store and Xbox. But in Steam, the drop is brutal. Yeah, very, very brutal. They have 700 people playing in the, which
is nuts for a Microsoft game.
It's nothing. It's literally less wood than an Mobilista 2, and this is a title that is cross-platform. I know it's just Steam numbers, and the majority of people will have Microsoft or Xbox. But if you go to Forza Horizon, it goes to 10,000 people or something like that. And it feels kind of strange saying that Forza Horizon, the spin-off, is 10, 15, 20 times bigger than the original number of what Forza is, especially when Forza is such a well-established name already. The quality of the product was simply not there since the beginning, and the car progression system, basically, when you have a game that tells you the best way to upgrade the game or to upgrade the cars to progress the game is not to play the game, it tells you a very wrong message. And that's essentially what happened. You would put all the aids in automatic. You go do your stuff, go downstairs, go cook, go clean, go do another hobby. The car will still going around, and you're still getting XP for the car without any input from you. So that tells you the wrong idea. The AI is good to, is good to play against, and needs to be corrected in all the penalty systems. But for me, the most important thing at the moment is that they need to fix the progression system. And sadly, the progression system, it's one of the easiest things for them to fix, because they have already information from Forza 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and they understand, or even Forza Horizon, and they understand what the community likes, and they can fix and tweak it according to what they're trying to do as well. Because I understand the point they wanted to make with this. They wanted to make the car feel your own, but at the same time, they kind of kept every car into a small little gate area, and you can't move all your efforts, all your grind of 3 or 4 hours for just one car.
Yeah.
And Forza was always about experimenting.
Well, it's interesting what you say about the No Man's Sky model, i.e. the game is a long-term project, and there will be updates and upgrades that react to how players play the game, right? Yeah. And there's part of me that wonders, if that's always the plan, if that's the direction that studios are going to, and I really hope it is, I really hope the studios are moving away from the annual cycle, right? You put a game out, and then for somewhere between 5 and 10 years, you're going to iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate and get that game perfect, and new content and new systems, and really refine the game before, after 5 to 10 years, bringing out a new version on a totally new engine, which then increases your ceiling in terms of quality.
Yeah.
That's what I'd like to see. But my question is, let's say you're the developer, right? And you're like, okay, Forza Motorsports, that's going to be a 10-year project. We're going to be working on this. We're going to bring out content. We're going to be constantly iterating and improving on this product. Now, in the tech world, when you want to put out a new product, you put out an MVP, right? A minimum viable product. You put out the minimum that you can get away with so that you can start getting data back about which bits of the product are the most important to the users before then doubling down on improving those bits. And you might release something and be like, actually, we weren't expecting this particular feature to be the really popular bit, but all of our users are saying that that's the bit that they like, so we're going to double down on that. And actually, the bit that we thought, maybe that's not as important. So I wonder if that kind of tech approach is starting to make its way into games, and now games are being released, earlier than they used to be. They're not as refined, they're not as polished. There was a great phrase that I learned on an accelerator that was, if you're not embarrassed when you release your product, you've released it too late. Now that's an extreme take, right? That's an extreme take, especially in the gaming world, because gamers have incredibly high standards. But I do wonder if it's that tech approach that's creeping its way into gaming. And so studios are right, let's get out the minimum product, that this is our brand, this is our storyline, this is the type of game it's going to be, and see how people react to it, and then double down on the bits that people are using the most.
It's interesting you say that, but I don't think Forza at this state is an MVP. I think it just went the wrong way.
MVP would be very harsh. I meant more the approach. Rather than,
I think it has just failed. They just misunderstood what people wanted. They went a specific way. They wanted to make a car all about the build itself and never about the experience of the build or the experience of experiencing multiple cars and multiple methods of driving, because Forza was always about imagination more than Gran Turismo.
Yeah.
It's always about you picking up a car and do something crazy with it if you want to, or you can build something a little more conservative. While Gran Turismo, for example, it's basically a car museum that you can do car culture stuff around it. But Forza was always about the imagination, and when you put a lot of hours behind just a car, they misunderstood what everybody had issues with, or what everybody wanted from that title, right? Now they're looking at it and, well, we've done wrong. Even if the game has many technical issues, I think the most important is basically fixing that part of the gameplay first, so people can actually come at it and, oh, this is not boring anymore. This is not grindy.
Well, I'm going to pick it up again in a few months. As soon as we start to see some rumblings from the community that it's getting better, and maybe we're starting to see that No Man's Sky effect, I'm going to pick it up again, because I do like those games. But we're going to move on. One final topic before we move to league racing news with George Morgan. Track Racer is entering the peripheral market. We saw this at the Sim Racing Expo last year, and it was even hinted the year before. It's been coming for a while. Obviously, it takes a long time to manufacture these products. Obviously, Track Racer is known best for its cockpits, but they are bringing out a shifter and a set of pedals first, and they are showing them off at Sim Formula Europe event. And good luck, Andy. This event looks incredible. The list of exhibitors going to this event is absolutely incredible. Now, 2022 Sim Racing Expo, we saw 3D printed versions of what the peripherals would be. Now, the race department article that I was reading from Tom Harrison Lord was talking about the new peripherals coming out, and it says that they'll all be displayed at the free to attend Sim Formula Europe event later this week in Maastricht, alongside an as yet unveiled direct drive wheelbase, which is interesting. Pricing availability to be announced. We hope to find out further details at the event. What I can't see is whether or not these are going to be working production models or even pre-production models that you be able to go and try. It's not specific, so I wonder if we'll actually be able to use them. But it's exciting to see another brand, especially like a trusted brand, if you like, a brand that's been around the sim racing market for a while, come into this electronics market. It's arguably getting a little crowded. Perhaps,
it is.
But competition is only a good thing for sim racers. It drives each of these companies to keep innovating, keep increasing quality, and keep finding ways of keeping the price down. So, it's in my opinion, it's only good news. And I'm excited to see what Track Racer try to do differently. I know Matt Sten quite well, and he's not the sort of guy who likes to just copy everyone else. So there will be something about his product line that is different. So I'm excited to see what that's going to be.
Yeah, it will be interesting.
No, it's all right. I mean, it's quite crazy how far we have come. I mean, I remember back years ago, I think we only had like 2 main lines, and that was Fanatec and Thrustmaster that kind of coveted the market at one point. But now, of course, we have Hoisingveld, we have, of course, various others, and that have sort of stepped up and brought new products to the market. But yeah, I think Track Racer is a name that has definitely been supported and embraced by the community for various different things. I know that they're avid sponsors of various league racing events, as well as podcasts and various other things. They're actually very involved in the community for a company that we probably don't hear enough about, really. I think in various ways, but this seems like a very good opportune time right now, because things seem to have quietened down. Obviously, Fanatec, we spoke about their problems last time on the show, and I think coming at this point, at the start of a brand new year, I think it's relatively good timing from Track Racer to release a new product.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading a tweet this morning from GP Laps. It's great streamer, does a lot of old school historic racing on Assetto Corsa and streams it. And the tweet was something about he was in a Micro Center, which is a big electronics store in the US, and he said that he saw 2 people buying like a full PC and sim racing rig setup. He saw a queue at I think it was people picking the staff were restocking the Thrustmaster wheel sections, and there was a queue at, I can't remember the brand, he said, a queue of people trying out a new wheelbase. He said, I don't know if sim racing is mainstream yet, but it's certainly starting to pick up in terms of the number of people that have wheels and pedals. So yeah, absolutely, it'll be an interesting time for Track Racer. And it's interesting where these new companies have come from, right? Because we've had Assetec, great brand, Danish brand, obviously, sponsor of the podcast, who out of nowhere released an entire product line of incredible quality. Like I've obviously got one behind me. I absolutely love it. But then you've also got Simagic and Moser, and they're real disruptors because they come in at a lower price point. But actually, it's not cheap and tacky. It's really good quality stuff. Like we had a Simagic on our our Track Racer 180. So Track Racer actually the first sponsor of this podcast last year. And we had the Track Racer rig in the office, and we had a Simagic M10 with a Simagic wheel on it, and it felt sturdy, like really sturdy. And we actually swapped it out for a CSL DD at one point last year. And it was a real, I love Fanatec, right? But it was a real step down from the M10 to the CSL DD. And I thought, you know what, just because it's Moser and Simagic doesn't mean that it's lower quality. So Track Racer is coming into a very interesting market where you have Simucube, Assetec, Fanatec kind of competing for that kind of premium. Maybe Fanatec is slightly more bridged across.
I think Moser have made the most noise.
Level, if you like.
Moser, in my view, have made the most noise in a sense that the community seems to be embracing them a whole lot. I hear like for instance the drivers in the Creator Series, many of them have plumbed for Moser and Simucube. Combining the two, I think they have made a huge impact. I think on the market, the streamers are using them. So it's crazy, really, how the market has shifted, and I would say that a lot of it comes down to the fact that Fanatec are having issues with lead times and things of that nature. They've almost allowed these other brands to enter the market and kind of assault on their land, really, at this point. And now, because these wheels are so successful, it's allowed them to retain a customer and consumer base.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's good news. All of this is good news for sim racers because it's just increasing that level of competition. So we should see more variety, more price points to enter at. I love. I realize that I've made it very clear that Aztec is sponsoring this, but Aztec's hardware line where you can upgrade, right? So you can start with the Prima, and then you could send it in to then get upgraded to the Forte, send that in to then get upgraded to the Invicta. So you don't have to buy, sell every time. There's these upgrade packages. So it's innovations like that I think this level of competition is driving. So I'm excited to see Track Racer entering this market. That their cockpits are absolutely fantastic. They get sim racing, Right, let's move on. George, what is happening in the world of league racing right now?
Well, PSGL last night, and it was a fantastic event. Went to Imola for the second round of the championship. Obviously, with F1 Esports taking a little bit of a back seat at this current stage. Obviously, PSGL and WR both being very active in ensuring that league racing still continues, which is great. And Ronhaar is back. Thomas Ronhaar taking victory again at Imola last time out, which was brilliant for him, and obviously continuing his great vein of form from Event 1, where he would take victory at Bahrain, as well as Jarno Opmeer chasing down after doing a very outlandish strategy in a sense that he boxed so late on his intermediates. It was a full wet race right through, and Jarno, despite choosing a strategy that certainly was vastly different to the rest of the field that took part, unfortunately just did not quite have quite enough to close down. Freddie Rasmussen looked like he was on for the win, though. I think this was probably the biggest controversial point of the race. Rasmussen on for the win. He was out in front, got a 3-second time penalty at Variante Alta that actually took him from top spot in what looked like a surefire win, and he was dropped down to third as a result. So yeah, really crazy. But Ronhaar does look like he is back in a rich vein of form. Had a little bit of a struggle at Portimao in the first round, but has since come back. And unfortunately, his teammate Brendan Lee, I think he had his own problems as well. He had a few issues at the start, which saw him drop down through the field. I'm sure that we'll see him back when round 3 rumbles around. But it definitely looks like the two teams, I think, to watch in the very early stages are Sauber and Red Bull Sim Racing. I think those are the two to watch at this very early stage. Mercedes are getting there, and I think with Danny Berejnay, I think now seemingly back to his very best, especially after winning at Portimao last time. I think Mercedes have also got lots of reasons to be excited should we see the next round of F1 Esports come through.
Yeah, it's exciting, and I'm really glad that PSGL and WR and others, even the smaller leagues are picking up the slack from F1. We did see somebody was sending around a job description yesterday. So F1 is looking for a new head of gaming, and I do wonder if that's a coincidence or not,
see that.
based on based on what's been happening. Okay, so thank you guys. That was good. So we are now going to be interviewing, or I will now be interviewing, Nathan Tague, head of sim racing at G2 Esports. But before I do, guys, I'd like to invite you both to send in. Well, I say send in. Just tell me now. A question for Nathan.
I'll kick things off if you want. No problem. Obviously, ESL R1, Nathan took, sort of an opening, well, a very main role in that in terms of, sort of plotting the path for G2 Esports through the course of that championship right through the year. So I'm very keen to get his thoughts from a manager's perspective on how the ESL R1 championship panned out, and I want to get his thoughts on the championship because it's a very unique concept in how it was run, and I'm very interested to see what a team manager made of it and his general thoughts around how that series was run.
Okay, I will try and sum that up for him later in this podcast. Okay, Random Cool Sign, you're up.
So yeah, mine is what does he think about Gunter Steiner leaving Haas? It's the big
nice curveball. I like it. Hopefully, it'll be like everyone else, very very sad. It's a big personality loss. And and obviously, we always say this is not an F1 podcast. The world does not need any more F1 podcasts. But Gunter Steiner leaving, for me, it kind of hit me yesterday more than I thought it would, because I think last season in particular was the first year where I wasn't planning my weekends around the F1, right? And I was, I'd watch the highlights, but I probably didn't watch all the highlights really. I just, the drama wasn't, the storyline just wasn't there for me last year. And I was like, come on, this year, I'm excited for the first couple of races this year. Let's bring it back. Let's get that excitement back into F1. Yeah. And Gunther Steiner leaving, it's like, it's all about the personalities, and that's a big personality gone. So I don't know. I remain hopeful for this season.
I want to see Gunther Steiner again, man. I want him to have like a really big yacht, not just a small boat.
Yeah. It's bad news for Drive to Survive as well, for the fans of that, because obviously that's a big face that's gone. So yeah. Rip Netflix, unfortunately. I think on that one. But,
I mean, we're going to get him in. That's a good point, actually. The Drive to Survive for last season presumably is coming out at some point. Do you know what? Last year, I counted down the days to Drive to Survive to come out, as I did the year before and the year before that. And this year, until you just mentioned it then, I hadn't thought about it once. So, we'll have to watch it. But it'll be the last one with Gunther Steiner, so we'll have to do a watch party. All right, guys, thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
See you.
Yeah, see you guys.
Whoa, Tom. Before we actually get into the actual interview, I have to say we do actually have a website. It's called Grid Finder. And if you haven't checked out Grid Finder yet, well, you need to check it out. If you're looking for any sim racing leagues, sim racing communities to start or necessarily join, head over there. You can find everything you need.
Nathan, welcome to the show. Our first ever repeat guest. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. I mean, bit of an interesting year in 2023 since we last caught up, but I'm good. I'm for better or worse, still extremely excited about sim racing and being a part of this kind of circus that we've got going on. So yeah, it'd be good to catch up.
Yeah,
Thank you for having me back.
You're more than welcome. I'm intrigued to hear everything you have to say about sim racing from the last year. Well, it's been about 18 months, I think, since you were on the show, but it has been an interesting 18 months. And it's been an interesting 18 months for a number of reasons. And I think the esports, and specifically the LAN events that have been happening, have caught a lot of people's attention for good and for bad. And you've been in the mix pretty much the whole time. So quick recap for those who don't know, because ordinarily on this podcast, we go through the whole story of somebody's life, basically, like what their first kind of touch point was with online racing and gaming, and then how that kind of snowballed into usually a career as either an esports driver or a team manager, or you work at a manufacturer like Track Racer or Assetech or Fanatec or whatever it happens to be, or you're a streamer. Like so that's usually what we do in this podcast. However, with yourself, we've already done that. So if you've not listened to Nathan's podcast episode, I think it is the third one we ever did. So you'd have to scroll all the way back, and you see the first episode we ever did with Random Call Sign, second one with Matt Stem from Track Racer, and I believe that you're number 3. And in that episode, we go through basically your whole life story. So yeah, do check that out if you've not seen it. But for now, Nathan, you are head of sim racing at G2 Esports and team manager for the Red Bull Racing esports team. So you have been in the mix. What's been the highlight of your last 18 months? Let's start there.
Yeah. I mean, from an esports level, it has to be Rensport coming out of the shadows, and R1 backed by ESL. That kind of has taken a huge amount of my time over the last year. So that sticks out as a highlight for me. But then also, I think just the general kind of movement of sim racing. There's been a lot of kind of side stories, I guess, that have been developing over the 18 months since we last spoke. Motorsport games, F1 sim racing. Lots of things that I think we anticipated would be in a very different spot than they are as we speak. So yeah, a bit of a mixed bag over the last year in particular for me.
Yeah, well, let's start with ESL-R1. So ESL-R1, we've spoken about it extensively on this show. So most listeners will know exactly what ESL-R1 is. But you have a very interesting perspective because no doubt you knew about ESL-R1 and you knew more details about Rensport than most people did, well ahead of these details coming into the public domain. So what was it like in the very early days when you were starting to get a bit of information about this new game called Rensport and ESL-R1 and this kind of sim racing on a whole new level? What was it like being inside that inner circle?
I think obviously it's exciting. It's easy to get swept up in that excitement sometimes and kind of not see things for what they are. But at the same time, I don't think I've ever got to that point with Rensport or R1. I think it was kind of frustrating in a way to have to see so much but be able to say so little, because at that point the narrative is driven by people that don't really have all of the information or all of the answers, and that at certain points during the year got a bit out of control, I would say. What
do you mean by that? Got out of control?
I think the way I've explained it to a lot of people is it was like having a really cool playground. You know, when you're a kid, like 8, 9, 10 years old, and you're walking past the playground, there's loads of kids playing inside. It's got everything. It's got the swings, it's got the slides, it's got a roundabout, people are going really fast, but you can't go in. So you're watching everybody play, but you cannot go in. And eventually, you being excited to play with all those other children turns to resentment towards those children and the park itself. You don't want to be a part of it. You hate it. Despite the fact that you've never been in, you hate it. And that's Rensport in a nutshell. For people that never got their hands on the beta in that early stage, that initial excitement, because Rensport is something to be excited about. I've spent enough laps on it, watched enough of it. It is a genuinely exciting project that can go to a really nice place. But when you deny a lot of people that are interested in it the opportunity to give that a try for themselves, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot at that point. So yeah, that's what I kind of mean by that. Like the narrative then at that point is it's not necessarily factual. It's driven a lot by emotion. In a sense.
So when you were getting the first bits of information kind of trickling in about Rensport, what it was going to be, what the project was about, what the kind of its USP was, were you from the beginning in the camp of, oh my God, this is amazing. If they get this right, this will be the future of sim racing, or did you ever have reservations?
I think you have to have a pragmatic approach to everything in management, because again, it's a similar scenario. If you emotively led, you end up making silly decisions. But I think it really helped for us very early on that we got hands-on with the game before kind of the circus around R1 started. We played Rensport with no strings attached, really. It was just come down and see what you think of it. And when I first sat down to give it a go at that point for an alpha, it was extremely impressive. It was obviously it had its kind of quirks and its foibles, but I thought to myself, we could be onto something with this. But ESL and R1 and things like that came way further down the line. So it was an odd process, to be honest. Like Rensport initially was just come and try it, see what you think of it, do you like it? And then it very quickly accelerated into this is what the plan is. There was a huge operation in the background from a G2 perspective in terms of actually even applying for R1, because that wasn't given. There's a lot of very, very big teams and organizations that missed out on that. And before you know it, you're competing. So it was kind of a whirlwind from that point.
It must be quite challenging as a team manager. So you started in the Forza world, and you kind of grew your expertise over time, and you had yourself you kind of built yourself into this position where you were the subject matter expert on online racing at a competitive level because you'd been in that game for so long, and then obviously Veloce and G2, and you were operating among games that you knew and you had experience of, and you'd been inside those games for a long time, so had really deep intrinsic understandings of it. What were the additional challenges that you faced as a team manager setting up a team for a game that you had hardly touched?
there's a lot to consider, honestly. I think, in terms of actually just the core of creating a competitive team, there's obviously different philosophies. So you'll notice that some teams went down the route of transitioning existing drivers in their roster over to Rennsport. There's some teams that predominantly went for iRacing based rosters, some teams that dipped into the Assetto Corsa market. I think the challenge was trying to figure out who would transition the best. And to be honest with you, I'm sat here after a year of Rennsport, and I still don't know the answer to that question. I think it's actually more based on the individual rather than the title that they come from. But then obviously you factor in that as soon as people heard about Rennsport and R1, the market expectations and values of drivers went crazy. You've got a huge amount of large organizations entering the party that went there before, that have sizable budgets and expectations, and so that whole process actually of getting together a competitive team was very difficult. We were very fortunate at the time to have a close relationship with Red Bull, because that really helped to elevate us to a decent performance level this year or last year. Keep forgetting we've had a new year.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's honestly so much to consider. I feel like I'd maybe sit here and talk for about 20 minutes on kind of all of the things that maybe go through my mind when trying to put together a competitive roster. I think a really good example is Gamers 8 in the middle of the year, in the fact that we'd had an okay spring season. It wasn't really the expectation to finish in 6th, but it's a new title, so you can be forgiven for having a slow start. But we had an opportunity to field an all-star team, basically. And at that point, it's who do you move aside? Do you move anyone aside, or do you stick with people that have raced on the game for a while in favor of people that will have 2 weeks to practice, or those kind of things? So there really is no clear, this is the best case scenario or best way to put it together. I think it's all based on experience and loads of different factors as you're kind of plotting your way through things, which I'm currently doing at the moment as well.
Well, I can imagine. It seems like the last year at least, the pace at which sim racing is developing, sim racing as an esport as well as a gaming sector, has really increased. Things are changing really fast, and you're having to deal with transitions all the time. For those who don't know or don't understand or have seen a little bit, tell us about the relationship and changing relationship between Redline, G2, Red Bull, etc., and how you've had to manage that.
Yeah, so I think obviously we've had a fantastic partnership with Red Bull for a number of years. We've worked with them in what's known as a white label basis. So basically, Red Bull trusts G2 to deliver their program for them from a competitive standpoint, and I think we had a really good time of it over those 4.5 years. I think the difficulty that we always had and that we always understood was that unfortunately Max has his own esports team, and when it came to renewing that deal, as soon as Max heard about that kind of scenario, there's not a lot you can do in that situation. So I'm proud of what we achieved with Red Bull over that period. We won F1 Esports as constructors twice. We won Porsche Esports Super Cup. We did a huge amount with that roster, and I'm very proud of what I took on from Nils, because it wasn't all me by any means. And what Redline have taken away from me. I think we've done a really nice job over the last couple of years of developing the drivers, not just as drivers but as human beings. I'm very proud of people like Freddie, for example, who have really come out of their shell, and Sebastian, who's added so many feathers to his cap. I don't think there's much room on it. So I will miss that team a lot. But yeah, as things stand, obviously G2 now no longer work with Red Bull Racing, which can be confusing for some because we are still partnered with Red Bull.
Yeah. There's a lot of very blurred lines in there about who is responsible for what, which individuals are kind of straddling both.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the nature of a early market. And what I mean by that is esports in sim racing, right?
Yeah, I guess so. And I think a little bit of that comes down to how Red Bull's structured as a business. So we always had a partnership with Red Bull first. That's why Red Bull's on our jerseys. That's why Red Bull supports all of our rosters. But Red Bull Racing are a different business. And whilst they carry Red Bull branding, they're their own entity. And they decided that G2 was the right partner to deliver their sim racing program in 2018. So it gets a bit confusing because we're no longer associated with one, but our partnership with the other is as strong as ever. So yeah, I can see what you mean by that for sure. But in terms of the actual drivers that are with Red Bull Racing, that were with G2 and have represented this year, they have all now transitioned to Redline. So no blurred lines there. Our roster is our roster, their roster is theirs.
So obviously January, new year, 2024. I expect most of it's already happened, but this is the time of year when people start thinking ahead to 2024, what our schedule is going to be, what our plans are, what our strategies are. As a team manager at the highest level in sim racing, as you are, what's on your plate in January as you're looking ahead to 2024? What are you looking ahead at?
So I guess while everyone else is winding down in kind of, I guess, more traditional jobs, November, December, January for us is awful in terms of kind of stress levels and just sheer kind of weight of what's going on. We're negotiating contracts, not just with drivers, but with support staff. We're budgeting for the year and going through kind of meetings with my superiors as to what I need for the year. Doing a lot of maths and a lot of spreadsheets based on what it is that we plan on entering. You get thrown obviously curveballs left, right, and centre. So things that you potentially are banking on don't necessarily manifest themselves to be what you imagined. And so I think it's using 2023 as a decent baseline as to what potentially will happen in 2024. But then studying really hard in terms of kind of emerging markets, or using your knowledge or history to say, okay, we're anticipating that Le Mans Virtual will come back this year. We're anticipating that there's probably going to be a new Assetto Corsa or a ramp up towards that. We're looking at potentially Wood Forza re-enter esports. And so you kind of keep all of those plates spinning in a way, whilst maintaining what your kind of core focus is for the year, which for us will obviously going to be Rennsport. So you're hedging your bets a little bit, but you're also putting a lot of things in stone, like concrete. Like if I go to my financial controller and say, this is my budget for the year based on these numbers, that is done. That's in the books. That's exactly what I'll be working with for this year. And I think that's what makes G2 and teams like G2 within sim racing quite rare, but also successful in general, because we don't take risk. We don't do things on whims. It's all very well thought out. There is a reason and a strategy behind it, and yeah, that's what this kind of 3-month period is. It's the groundwork for the hopeful success that we experience throughout the year. People obviously tune into the Twitch streams and see a tournament for 2 days or 3 days, but there is an awful lot that goes into that at this point during the year.
Yeah. So when you're looking at series, you mentioned a couple there, hypothetically something to do with Forza, something to do with the new Assetto Corsa, for example. There's a lot of esports series that run, some large, some small. Some of the larger teams do get involved with league racing, for example. When you're laying out your plan for the year, the season, what's your checklist when you look at a season as a potential season? When you look at a series as a potential series for G2 to compete in, what's your checklist? What does it need to do for you to be able to commit that budget to it?
I think obviously from a business perspective, commercially, that's always a box that needs ticking immediately. If it's going to be something that we can pivot to and utilize our existing driver roster, then it doesn't really cost the organization much to do that. Whereas if you look at, let's say, not to pick on them, but eNASCAR. That requires a significant reinvestment in a different area of expertise, because you can't just expect a road driver to go and be successful within eNASCAR. So obviously that comes into it. What is the initial kind of setup, and what investment will we need initially upfront to make it happen? But I think that varies team on team. I like to have quite open and honest conversations with my drivers. I think protecting them and managing them is extremely important. We last year, for example, did R1 over the course of the year, and Gamers 8 came out of nowhere, and we'd already committed to do an SRO. That meant making a decision to pull out of SRO. And obviously certain members of the roster were disappointed with that, but at certain points you sometimes have to kind of save them from themselves. You can take a very kind of, I guess, blasé view of sim racing or esports in general and think, easy job, you just play games for a living. But it's not, not even remotely. And so, managing them over the course of the year and making sure that they're looked after and performing at their peak across all things that we do is also a massive factor. One thing that is really interesting to me is that I think a lot of people, and there's a misconception out there that I see a lot, that prize money factors into organisation decision making. It does, but not to the level that people think it does. If there's a $1 million prize pool for a tournament, of course organisations are going to be interested in fielding as strong a roster as possible. But part of good planning is not planning on what you might have, it's what you do have. And so whilst those things are nice, they're always additionals into what I planned throughout the year. I would like to think that, fingers crossed, we don't do this, but if we go through an entire year and win nothing, that sim racing within G2 is still in good shape, it's still responsibly run, it's still something that's going to continue into 2025, 2026. So that's the long-term aim. Obviously we want to win, but we want to make sure that people are able to have a long-term sustainable career with us as well. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into choosing a series. I think also obviously who's behind it. If you've got a company like ESL behind a series, naturally there's a trust level there, that what you're taking part in is going to be well promoted, it's going to be well run, there's going to be minimal risk in terms of negative PR or press. So it all goes into kind of a melting pot, and you take it a case by case basis. But yeah, again, I think going back to what I initially said, a really good conversation with drivers is a good start, because it means that you're never in a situation where you feel like you're forcing drivers to do things that they don't want to do. If they lead those conversations, then theoretically they're happy and they're motivated. So
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how the value of a driver is not just about pure pace in a given sim. For example, marketability is a good one. If you have sponsors coming on board and you want to be creating content, if you have somebody who's a little flat, then okay, they might be getting a few extra points per season, but they're going to cost you in the sense that you might not be able to get as much sponsorship revenue with that driver because they're a little difficult. So how much of your time is spent on making the team commercially viable, not just a race winning team?
I think it's when you're initially kind of, I guess, appraising a driver or scouting drivers, you're looking at everything. I think I look at, obviously, overall pace as a very high scoring factor in terms of how I would approach signing a new driver, because ultimately we are a competitive esport and a results-based business.
Yeah, if you're going to have one but not the other, there's only one option, and that's pace with no, I don't want to say personality, but no, let's call it marketability. But whereas it doesn't work the other way around.
Yeah, exactly. But then also you are looking for, I guess, their kind of unique selling point. But that's a really weird way of putting it. I would say I look for more like what makes them tick. Like what does it take for me to get the most out of Freddie, for example? What is our angle with Isaac? what story can we tell around Sebastian? These are that. It's of course a factor. I think it's less of a factor for us because we're entrenched in an organization that has a huge partner suite anyway. And I think, we're very fortunate that, as you can see, people like, Ralph Lauren and.
It's a very cool hoodie, by the way. If you're listening on Spotify, make sure you get across to the YouTube to have a look at this hoodie. I actually didn't realize it was G2 until about 10 minutes into this interview. I was like, oh my God, that is the most, because I was like, God, it's a Polo Ralph Lauren hoodie, but the logo is massive. Why is it so? Oh, because right, G2 is in the middle of it. That's very cool.
Very cool, but yeah, we're very fortunate in that. I guess in a way, there's less pressure on me to kind of drive those kind of things. So obviously, we have sim racing endemics like Next Level Racing, but I think to me, we're still in a process within G2 where I'm still building sim racing to be something that sits alongside our other esports. G2, if you ask a traditional esports fan, is still well renowned for League of Legends or Counter-Strike or Rainbow Six. They're probably the three titles that comes to mind before anything else. And I think my work is more, challenging the perception that sim racing is niche, challenging the perception that, sim racing will never be a traditional esport or never sit alongside these titles as an equal. Because I believe it can. I believe it will in time. So I think I've gone off on a bit of a tangent. I definitely have. But though that kind of factor doesn't matter as much to me, I don't think.
Interesting, because I guess because a lot of people say that esports drivers you need to tell a story, but actually part of that story is the results. And so they could have the funniest Twitch channel in the world, but it's not necessarily the right story for a pro esports team. Yeah, and it is interesting this role that you have as a team manager for sim racing esports team. It's interesting how different skills as a driver kind of go up and down in value as the market shifts, right? So I think probably fair to say 5 or 6 years ago you had real specialists in each title. Whereas now you start to find more drivers who are more willing to jump between one and the other, and Sebastian is a great example of that. We had him on the podcast a few months ago, and then I saw him again at the Red Bull factory, and obviously he was doing F1 and he was also doing Rennsport. And it something that jumped out at me was how his value to teams has increased because he is adaptable. So, for example, he's doing Rennsport at the moment, but in the future, let's say Forza announces the mother of all sim racing tournaments, and we'll get onto your opinions of Forza in a minute. But if they announce a tournament like that, then you have to be able to pivot. And as you said, it's a lot more efficient, a lot cheaper if you can just take existing drivers and be like, great, well, this calendar doesn't clash with this calendar, so you can do that and you can do that. Great, fantastic. Now, there might be some performance loss because you're now splitting your practice time. But actually, when you get to those levels, it's marginal. I'm making assumptions here. I would say it's kind of marginal, and the gains of being able to enter a whole new tournament outweigh the marginal losses.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is pretty much spot on. I think there is definitely development in what an esports athlete within sim racing is from 5 years ago to now. Sebastian's a really good example. I think there are still what I would call unicorns in terms of people like Seb. Jarno is another great example. Marcel, who basically give a team everything in terms of being personable, creating a really good level of content, but also having the X factor in terms of performance. That's extremely rare, and will continue to be extremely rare within sim racing, I think, for maybe the next 4 or 5 years before I think that develops a little bit more. But
yeah,
I think the expectation is higher in terms of off the circuit stuff, because going back to our results for this year, for example, it's easy to look at an Excel spreadsheet and say, oh, this doesn't look too great, or this person hasn't performed versus this person. but there's a whole host of factors behind things that, people. Isaac's a really good example. I think Isaac does not get anywhere near the amount of credit he deserves in terms of sim racing circles, unless people know Isaac or, have been in a team with it. He is an extremely hard worker. He elevates others. He's a perfect teammate in terms of, his work ethic, but also his ability to understand a situation for what it is and not take it personally. Like, we had Isaac and Sebastian team together in Gamers 8, and despite the fact that Isaac qualified third behind Seb, Isaac ran that whole race not fighting, playing a percentage game to ensure that Sebastian won and that we got the points. There's a lot to be said for a driver that puts the team above all else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because it's I think the sim racing teams are you're kind of fighting for survival as well as victory, right? It's not like F1 in the real world, or it's not like SRO where the series will exist forever and you just want to keep pushing to the front. There is an element of, especially with you exist within a larger organization of esports, which is already hugely successful. It's arguable how profitable esports is generally, but that's probably a whole different podcast. But you're kind of having to justify the existence of a sim racing team within an organization like G2 Esports. And so it's G2's survival becomes more important relative to an individual driver's performance or results, right? So I guess it's incredibly valuable to find a driver that sees that bigger picture, that, okay, well, if I get these extra points here and go from, let's say, 5th to 4th, but it means that we don't get first, we only get second, then there's a huge impact on, my career going forward. So, yeah.
Hey, are you looking to upgrade your sim racing gear and even your sim racing equipment? Well, boy, do we have a place for you to check out. Now, huge shout out to our sponsor of the podcast, Assetech. If you're looking to upgrade any of your equipment, this is the place to go. The highest quality, literally feels like you're actually in a racing car. It's so beautiful. The equipment there, the highest quality, amazing. All the people there, incredible. Assetech, huge shout out to them. Now, back to the rest of the episode.
How much more difficult is it to prepare and manage an esports team when the series you're entering is cancelled? That might be a leading question.
I think it's strange because in those situations you might not necessarily know it's cancelled until the preparation's over. So, you approach everything with the best case scenario in mind. And I think, if we're looking at, let's say, F1 as an example, I would do my absolute best to protect the drivers from as much outside noise as possible. Because, in that situation, you don't know if it goes ahead or it doesn't. And if it does go ahead and, you've allowed those things to affect your preparation, or you've taken your foot off the gas and others haven't, at this level, you will be shown up for that really quickly. And so, I don't think it affects prep at all if you don't let it. And that's, a really key aspect of managing a team and managing their expectations and their, the way they're feeling on a one-to-one and as a team level. They ultimately, at that point, the plan is set. That they'll have their kind of build up and rotor, I guess. And for them, it's just point A to point B, and what happens when we get there is what happens.
Which was in this case chaos. So, what is happening at F1 Esports from your perspective? Because there's a lot of rumors going around. There's a lot of articles that have come out. There's a lot of interviews that have been done where people are kind of spilling all. There's some drivers that have even broken rank and kind of, I was going to say moaned or whined, but actually that's a bit harsh. I think genuinely complained for very genuine, real reasons on social media platforms. But from your perspective, kind of being at a more managerial level, what is going on at F1 Esports right now? I think F1 sim racing, I think they call it now.
Yeah. I'm still getting used to that myself. I think obviously, first and foremost, I feel terrible for every driver and member of teams that have put in so much effort to prepare for the season. Because as I alluded to earlier, it's not a simple job. It's not all, sunshine and rainbows. It's hard work. People sometimes scoff when you say esports athlete, but these guys put in a huge amount of work on and off, the server to get to where they are. And, there's a whole network of people around them that support them. And they're all at the moment hurting from this situation. No one's benefiting from this, aside from maybe a few random people running, news accounts on Twitter. But yeah, I think it's just a horrible situation because obviously, again, kind of like Rensport, but maybe more justifiably, the narrative's being driven from the outside. F1 themselves haven't really said a lot. Well, they haven't said anything, and I think that causes a lot of the issue, to be honest.
Creates a vacuum that needs to be filled, and
correct.
It's filled by those without the correct information.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of it where 2 + 2 is equaling 4, and they're hitting the nail on the head. So obviously the leaks are working for them, but there's a lot of it that came out of nowhere that made absolutely no sense, but was taken as gospel because the other leaks have been accurate. So you have to be really careful what you consume on socials, to be honest. Those people, despite maybe not outwardly saying it, they have an agenda, of course. They're not verified or verifiable news sites. They're just random, in most cases, teenagers just, I guess, leaking news for clout, really, which is, a sad situation to be in around a series as prominent as F1, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you are, but I think you're referring to the League Racing News or LRN Twitter account. And actually, I think something that I noticed was when it first started breaking, and I don't really want to give too much voice to that account because I think it is run by a child who's very angry and abusive. So it's not something that I want to be involved in. But George Morgan obviously got a lot of clout. Sorry, is that the right word? Got a lot of abuse, let's say, for just being affiliated with it. Like George was very, very excited to go and commentate on the F1 sim racing series, and it was cancelled, and he lost out just as much as all the drivers and the teams. And that's good for his career, it's good for his experience, and it's the world that he is super passionate about. And yet, because he's a commentator and therefore affiliated in the minds of the fans with F1 sim racing more so than the teams, which might feel independent of it in a way, he was getting a lot of abuse. And actually, what he did do off the back of it was start his own news channel, which has been like the phoenix from the ashes of this situation. And it's nice to see somebody take quite a dire situation and be like, right, well, how can we get something positive back out of this? Well, I do know, and in his case, he does know quite a bit about what's going on, and he has got some insider information. So he shares it in a very positive way, and he brings in people like, Jessica Ball, and, like really bringing the community together to be like, okay, well, if it's not happening, that's fine. We'll report on what we know. And actually, there's WR and PSGL to go and watch, and the drivers are all taking part in it, and we can get behind some exciting sim racing. So there was a silver line, but obviously all of that benefits the enthusiasts, as opposed to those who are paying their bills by being sim racers.
Yeah, I think that's the underestimated part of all of this situation. And the reason that I've taken absolutely no pleasure in it. Like, it kind of baffled me, but also maybe quite sad to see people reveling in the situation. Like when people's livelihoods do depend on that series. More people than you probably imagine. And so, I think the people that are speaking out from a place of passion around the series, but also from a place of trying to find a resolution to something. It's a really difficult situation. There's a lot of nuance, obviously, and I at the moment don't know if it even comes back in this season. from last year, there's from what I know been no development on any calendar or any idea of what the plan is going forward. So it's a
little frustrating, almost. These are my words, not yours, but almost a little disrespectful from the series organizer to not be keeping people up to date with this very unusual situation, knowing full well how invested emotionally, professionally, and financially the teams are into what's going on. It strikes me as very odd that as a team manager, you're not getting regular updates. You'd almost want to have almost daily updates of apologies, and this is what we're thinking, and this is what we're going to plan, and we're going to try and maybe do something here or there. But to have absolutely nothing it's insulting.
I think I'd agree with that word. I think obviously I have to be careful what I say because my PR lady will probably.
This is why I totally appreciate that you have to be very guarded, and so I'm probably trying to get frustration out on your behalf, knowing full well that I'm not expecting you to join in with me too much.
Yeah. I think it's not that I'm not upset or angry about the situation. I think everyone that's involved, or everyone that has been involved, everyone that's given anything to the F1 esports series since 2017 has every right to be annoyed about the situation that it's in at the moment. Because at the moment it feels like wasted time. But it's not that I want to protect them from anything or any backlash because I don't feel like they deserve it. But also at the same time I have relationships that I need to maintain and those kind of things. But I think my overall kind of appraisal of it is that it's something amazing that unfortunately at the moment is being run by someone that probably doesn't care enough about it, or it's maybe they do and maybe the people above them don't. But it's just kind of a sideshow that's it looks to me like it's a nuisance to somebody rather than a genuine passion project or something that is seen as something to be proud of.
Yeah, well, that would be a shame, given that there are thousands of people who would give their right arm for that position. Let's move on. I was going to say to happier topics, but actually I wanted to ask you about Forza. Now, this is where you started. This was your obviously our discussion in our last podcast. This is where it all kind of started to speed up for you, started to grow, the passion developed, and that, this could be a thing for me. Forza was where that happened. It was kind of the conception of Nathan Tague, the sim racer, right? Very weird phrasing, but they will edit that out. So Forza Motorsport, obviously a bit of a flop. It was tipped to be really exciting. I went to Gamescom and I tried it. I watched the demo of Forza before it came out, and it looked stunning. And there were loads of features in it that I loved, like the AI influenced by your friends' driving characteristics and styles was incredible. I know that there's been a version of that in the past, but the way they were explaining the updates to that, the kind of asynchronicity of multiplayer experiences within the single player campaign, I was like, that is genius. The game looked incredible. There were some very, very bold claims about the upgrades to the physics models. The upgrades that you could do for the cars looked insane, comprehensive, but it just didn't land. Why not?
I think you've mentioned a lot of things there, but I would say probably there's a counter to every single one of them in terms of the reason that it's not landed. Like the promised physics changes weren't we heard phrases like built from the ground up, but it doesn't feel like that to me. It still isn't great on a wheel unless you're willing to put a decent amount of time into trying to find a good baseline for settings, or to watch a YouTube video and copy those. I was having a debate with someone on Twitter X, and I asked them a pretty, I think, simple question, which is, what has Forza done to innovate in the last 10 years? Because when Forza Motorsport first came out, it was genre defining. It was leading. It blew everyone away. They were, developing and introducing features that, people then copied for the next 10 years, or people then, refined over that period of time. But Forza Motorsport, this iteration of Forza Motorsport came along and, to me, did nothing. It just released, and it was. There's nothing there that sets it apart from other games. In fact, I think you could probably make an argument that everything that Forza does, another game somewhere along the line does it better. And I just think to myself, they've had 6 years to sit and look at this and think, what do we want it to be? And they've released it, and they don't know what it is, and as a result, no one else really does. Is it a hardcore motorsport game? Is it somewhere that people come as communities to gather together in a shared passion for cars? What is it? I just think it's a gigantic monument to compromise. Like, it does everything but nothing at the same time.
Which is a shame, because it has one of the most fanatical fan bases ever. There's so many people that have such strong emotional connections to Forza, because obviously the franchise goes way back to when you and I were probably at primary school playing on the Xbox, and it is a shame for it to kind of flop in this way. And of course, it's always going to be compared side by side with Sony Interactive's Gran Turismo, which actually is a pretty decent game. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but I would say if you put it side by side with Forza, it's head and shoulders above.
Yeah, I mean, that's the direct comparison, isn't it? Like, there's not really a game or a Simcade title that exists outside of those two, really, that is comparable. And so when, again, after a 6-year development period, you release something that's pretty miles off in terms of, what the other camp are doing, then, you're asking for trouble. And I think I said it again on socials. If Sony somehow, saw the wood through the trees and decided that they wanted to go down the route of cross-platform functionality and open up Gran Turismo to Steam, that game would take over the world. I'm sure of it. And the need for a title like Forza Motorsport would no longer be. So
it's a really good point, actually. The only reason I don't play Gran Turismo is because my PlayStation is usually set up downstairs, because I play Jackbox when friends come over after the pub, or sit and play No Man's Sky just on the couch in a really relaxed setting, and I just can't bother to bring it up and plug it into the rig. But if it was on Steam, God, I'd play it all the time.
Yeah, I think something like that would be transformational for sim racing in general, because it's a perfect gateway. Like, it takes people like you and I, who were playing racing games as youngsters, and shows them what else is out there.
Halfway.
Yeah. Not saying that Gran Turismo isn't a great game in its own right, and people can stay there and be content with that for 20, 25 years, whatever. Like, it's fantastic, as they have. Yeah. And it has a thriving esports kind of scene itself, within itself. But that being available to people through a wider platform than just PlayStation would change the game, I think.
What do you think? So just to kind of finish off on Forza, before I realize that there's been a lot of bad news, I guess, that we've discussed in this episode, and I want to finish on what you're excited about for the next 12 months. But just to finish up on the discussion about Forza, what's the key thing it needs to work on to regain the community's trust? And the reason and the context for this question, which reminds me, we need to go through our community questions because we've got a lot. So before this show, myself, Brandon Coulson, George Morgan got together, and we were discussing what had been going on that week. And Forza was brought up. And something that Brandon Coulson said was, is it going for the kind of No Man's Sky approach? No Man's Sky obviously came out a few years ago, and it was okay, big hype, flatlined a little bit, but the updates have been so fast and so significant and so complementary to the user experience that actually there's a real growing user base of this game well after the release. And I made the argument that perhaps in nowadays, gaming studios are taking lessons from tech companies where they are releasing, and I'm not saying that Forza is an MVP, but earlier stage versions of their game to see how the community responds to it, and then double down on the bits that people like and maybe shy away from the things that people are less interested in. So they're kind of essentially launching at a beta phase. So what used to be called alpha is now beta, and beta is the release. So that was kind of my theory. What's your thoughts?
There's obviously a lot to be said for those kind of strategies. No Man's Sky is a really good example, but Baldur's Gate as well. Won Game of the Year last year, but that's been floating around for 2-3 years now and was absolutely atrocious when I first played it. So there can be that, and Forza's not beyond redemption. It's not a complete steaming pile of awful. It's there is still something there, which is probably why people are so passionate about it. I just think it needs somebody to take it by the scruff of the neck and decide what it is that it actually wants to accomplish as a base level. If it wants to be a sim racing game with features similar to an iRacing, then do it. Don't spend an insane amount of development time, or 6 years of development time. To me, I'm sorry, obviously it's a feature that you said you were quite excited for, but don't waste 6 years making AI driver cars based on what your friends are doing. That's what multiplayer's for. Single player, just play career against AI. That's fine. Whatever. And because there is significant resource, I think, within Forza specifically, that unfortunately is mismanaged and dedicated to creating things that nobody ever asked for. They've had an overwhelming amount of feedback over the years about key things that Forza was well known for previously in terms of marketplaces and auction houses, and Forza 2 had tournaments built into the game. Like, that was crazy. That was so far ahead of its time. And then they just decided, you know what, sack that off. Let's do driver tars, and let's do God knows, I don't know, but so many just random features that nobody ever asked for or created.
Yeah. No, that's a really interesting take, actually. It's a really interesting take. I think what I liked about the driver task system is that it was innovative. I'd heard of it before, but it was interesting to me that they were doubling down on this feature. I'd seen a bit of a trend in the increase of asynchronous gaming where people are so busy, they can't always get together with their friends. So how do you get friends to play together when they're not online at the same time? But yeah, really interesting. Now, I have just seen the time, and my goodness, we've got like 3 minutes, right? So I'm going to rattle through our community questions. We need nice, short, punchy answers. So question 1 is from a guy called Jardier. How do you pick new drivers for big esports teams?
I think we touched on that earlier in the episode, to be fair, so relatively simple one, but there's a lot of factors. Overall pace, I think people probably don't realise that as managers, we watch a lot more esports than you think we do.
Okay. That was concise. Okay, good. Right. So nice. Next. So this one is actually from the marketing manager at Gridfinder, Liam, and he doesn't often submit questions. So he asked, what's been your favorite memory from the esports competitions themselves? So Liam is a huge CS fan, right? And he loves the stadium style esports. That's probably where that question is coming from.
Yeah. I was very, very fortunate in Katowice to watch G2 lift the trophy from next to the trophy. That was a very, very eye-opening moment and kind of gave me a lot of fire to make sure that one day something that I lead is competing in something of that magnitude and we're winning.
Nice. Okay. So Random Call Sign asks, what do you think about Günther Steiner leaving Haas?
I actually opened an article to see what Haas said when they first entered F1, because I wanted to judge him based on what the goals were, what Gene was saying when they first entered. If you look back at the time that Günther's been in F1, as much as he's a great personality and he's probably brought a lot of attention to Haas in terms of media, that team, as horrible as it sounds, might as well have not existed, because they've not done anything. Like, what can they take away from that period of time in terms of tangible results?
Yeah, I can't really argue with that, to be honest. other than entertainment and other than playing a great part in Drive to Survive, which arguably led to a huge surge in the number of fans, it's probably done a huge favor for F1 as a sport, but maybe not so much for Gene Haas himself.
There's probably a lot of broadcasters out there now rubbing their hands that he's a free agent.
Yeah, I mean, he would be great on. Imagine him on doing the grid walk. Günther Steiner grid walk. Now that is something that I would pay to watch. Final question from George Morgan: how do you feel the ESL R1 Championship panned out from a manager's perspective?
I enjoyed it. There's obviously a lot that needs to be tweaked and adjusted, but for a first year and a first effort, it was very good. I think obviously the expectations were high and probably it was judged a bit more harshly as a result, especially with kind of the negative discourse around Rennsport itself in general. But I'm relatively content with where it's at.
Great. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for your time. Again, I really appreciate you coming onto the show for a second time. And good luck with all of your races in 2024. And for anybody listening, if you're ever looking for some well-informed, well-balanced insider takes on sim racing, esports, racing games, make sure you go and follow Nathan Tague on Twitter. Probably one of my favorite accounts. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll chat soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it, guys.